Should women really be flying? We're talking about that today in The Hangar.
I used to be a well-respected member of the aviation community, and then I started flying to Cirrus, and that changed.
Oh, that was great until the engine quit.
And all of a sudden I see these explosions and these trees exploding.
I'm walking away a better pilot because of this discussion.
Welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Christy Wong.
And I'm Dan Milliken. Today's show, we're talking about the age-old discussion, men versus women. This time, it's in the cockpit, it's flying. And we have a great group of people to talk about this. Let's start at the end. Over here, we have Tamara Griffin. Tamara, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Tamara, tell us what you do.
I have a nonprofit called Girls in Flight Training, as well as I have a flight school at Propulse Airport.
Okay. Cheryl, introduce yourself first.
Cheryl Pitzer. I'm an MD-11 captain at FedEx and also a Czech airman. And I also volunteer for Project Orbis, which is an MD-10 that's a fully accredited eye hospital, and we go to developing nations and do eye surgeries.
Okay, then Dr. Jeremiah Riggins.
I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work primarily with combat veterans and traumatic stress disorders.
All right, so there we go. Quite a distinguished group. Let's just launch right into it. Let's start with Cheryl. Cheryl, what has been your experience as a woman in the male-dominated, because clearly it's male-dominated industry of flying?
I think the biggest thing is as a female, it's kind of assumed that I can't do the job until I prove I can, whereas the men, it's kind of assumed they can until they prove they can't. Okay.
Bear, what do you think? Bear. For those who are wondering, Bear is a nickname. I've known Dr. Riggins for quite a while. So, Bear, what do you think?
So when we look at kind of cognitive differences between males and females, is on average there are definitely differences. There's differences in brain structure, all that kind of stuff. There's definitely differences, but that's on average. When we look at the individual person, if you put a group of men together, a group of women together, those men may have as much differences between each of them as they have between the differences in the men and the women. So there's variance within the individual. There's going to be as much variance in the individual women as there is between those two groups. And so for me, it's more experience is kind of the great equalizer between any of that. So there are differences, but how much do those differences make? Probably not that much.
So Christy, is it harder for women to fly than men?
So in my experience, just for myself, and I'm just an N of one, but I've found, and with the females that I've grown up around and been around, it seems to me like women tend to carry a little bit more fear, maybe a little bit more anxiety, whereas the guys that I've known, they get out there, they can do the maneuvers. Just on average, for me, my experience, my N of one, I've seen that guys, they can get out there, they can typically get in the airplane, go do the maneuvers, go do the approaches, go do what they need to do. Whereas women, they're a little bit more methodical and cautious about it. And I've actually done a little bit of reading, and I've noticed that there's a biological difference, of course, there between men and women. Men are biologically programmed to kind of go out there and fight the bear, whereas, women are biologically programmed to stay back and protect the children. So for me, for example, I started flying at 34. And I realized that, I am a little bit more cautious now than I was when I was, in my early 20s. I'm a mom. I've got kids at home. I'm a wife. I've got a lot to lose. So I'm taking it, a little bit slower. And like in my brain, I feel like I'm a little bit more nervous than the average, pilot out there, or more nervous maybe than another guy would be. So that's just kind of my perspective.
Tamara, what do you think about that? Are women more prone to anxiety or fear than men?
I would have agreed with that originally, but my experience has changed, and I think that's also how we've been brought up. I was raised in aviation, so I never knew I couldn't do it, turn a wrench or fly the airplane, but I took time off from it, and then I found my own fears when I was getting back into it. So it was overcoming that rust. So I think we all carry the fear, and I do see it in some of my men that become rusty pilots. But again, I think men are much more prone to, I can do this, or they also refuse to acknowledge their fear. Yeah. And so they fight through it, whereas women will say, I'm fearful.
Okay, so Jeremiah, what do you think?
Yeah, so some of that can also be an age discrepancy as well. So males' brains actually develop slower than female brains do. And the
This is
part
on
of,
camera.
Yeah, this is true. This is Googleable. So male brains develop slower than female brains do, and the part of the male brain that develops the slowest is the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that says, "Hey, this is a bad idea." So you add that with testosterone. So in younger males, they're much more likely to die from accidents, things like that, because they don't have the brakes to go like, "Hey, this is a terrible idea." So yeah, I mean, some of those things that you're describing, absolutely. Some of that's probably going to equalize as you get older a little more. Males have a tendency to be more cautious as we get older because we realize like that was a bad idea. So yeah, so I think some of that plays out.
Well, so Chrissy said in her group of one, she's thinking that the whole men are go fight the bear and women are more stay at home and guard the children. How is that accurate as far as the group of men and women, or is Chrissy's thing unique?
No, I mean, I would have a tendency to agree with that. I'm not sure exactly what the research is on that, but I have a tendency to agree with that just from you look at physical differences and things like that, bigger muscles, that kind of thing.
Well, and the women, it's funny because I'm friends with people outside of aviation, believe it or not. And I've had multiple women, they look at me and they're like, wow, you are such a daredevil, going out there and just flying. And I'm like, I'm really not that bad. Like, I'm in a 172, I'm in a Piper Warrior. Like, I'm not out there,
Test pilot.
Right, exactly. Like, I don't understand why it's so daring, but all of these women, not all, but a lot of these women in my circle, they seem to think that it's just this amazing thing that I've gone out and learned how to fly. I must just have an extra dose of adrenaline or testosterone or something, and it just baffles me that they feel that way.
Well, I think some of it too is I've noticed from the days when I was learning and as a CFI and going up the ranks all the way up to where I am today as a check airman, I think that men will cover it up much more. The ego is there. I'm going to manhandle this airplane. I'm going to do this. Whereas women are more prone to say, "Oh, I made that mistake. I made that mistake." More self-deprecating, I guess. They're more apt to say something about it. One of the best pieces of advice that I got when I was coming up the ranks, a female airline pilot told me, "Never let them see you cry." And it was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got because men perceive women crying as weakness. And typically we cry if we're frustrated. Men get mad when they're frustrated, women get tears. It's not really crying, but they're coming out and you can't do anything about it.
I would rather cry than punch you.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's how I think most women are. And so there's a little bit of difference there.
I tell my girls, go cry in the shower. They can't see you cry in the shower.
No.
Because we are taught we have to hide this if we're going to endure a male-dominated industry.
Okay, well, we talk about some of the dysfunctional attitudes that we're taught in our pilot training, that to get their itis, and one of them is the macho thing that nobody can tell me what to do. You mentioned that men have more of a tendency to cover up that through ego or that macho feeling. Jeremiah, is that accurate?
Yeah, it's certainly accurate. I mean, so even when you're talking about like men get angry, okay, so that's a socially normed behavior, right? So,
right.
When you're a little kid, it's like, no one ever says like boys don't get mad. They say like boys don't cry. It's cover up your emotions, bury those emotions, don't let people see those emotions. They're seen as a weakness. Absolutely, I would agree with that.
So is that culture, or is it something that we're born with?
It's culture.
It's more culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's more culture. I mean, there's some of that anyway, where men may not be as in tune with some of those emotions, but for the most part, that's culture. Cover up certain emotions, express other emotions.
Okay, so for the women professional pilots, what are you seeing it get better, worse, stay the same? Where are we at now?
I'm seeing improvements in my flight school with the clients that I'm seeing. Like I said, some of the younger generation, the men and the women, there's less of these differences of what they're hiding or not hiding. In some ways, I'm seeing less of the machoism among the younger ones. I'm seeing the same fears that we feared when we first learned to fly. But I'm also seeing more and more women that have that aggressive side to them, not just me, that, are willing to say, oh, I can do this, even when someone is telling them you shouldn't do this, because they want to go prove you wrong. So I'm seeing it change, I think, but it's going to be probably another generation before we see a real change.
Well, and when I say is it getting better, I am specifically talking to the way women are treated by men in the cockpit. You know, are you seeing a change?
It's hard to say because by the time I get to the FedEx level, a lot of what I was talking about before went away. Like I was not assumed that I couldn't do the job at that point. But there is still a little bit of, oh, you got hired because you're a female, which is not true. I mean, I think ATP, 6% of ATPs are women, and I think the airline average is about 4%. So really you would think it'd be about 6%. So there's still some of that discrimination that way, but I'm not seeing it so much as you can't do the job.
I would say, when I was trying to fly corporate and stuff, and even something less than 10 years ago, I was not hired because I was a female pilot.
Yeah.
They chose an older man who had half the experience.
Yeah.
That was a blow to me still to experience that. And my daughter experienced it too. But certain jobs, the government jobs and stuff, they have leveled that playing field until you get into the individual people you deal with.
Well, now, okay, so Cheryl, you said that men are claiming that you got the job because you're a woman. You're saying you didn't get the job because you're a woman. It's two totally opposite things. What I don't understand.
Still the same play.
Yeah.
In her case, these, I don't know about her case, but in my case, it was perceived that I would, he didn't want his wife to have a jealousy issue. I don't know what that stands to, him and his relationship, who was the more the problem, but it was, he took my skills and threw them out because I was female. Whereas, when I was a mechanic though, I was considered hired because, oh, well, you're a female, so you obviously got the job.
So Jeremiah, what is going through the mind of these men that are not hiring women because they're women and hiring women because they're women?
I mean, that's a tough one because, again, that's going to be so individualistic. But
Right.
I think, when you're in a male environment and you think about competition and things like that, it's going to be different for a male to lose to another male at some level versus a male to lose to a female, right? Because if a male loses to a male, we can always kind of cut our losses. Oh, you're better or this. If a male loses to a female, it's generally a bigger ego blow. But exactly what each person's thinking, I mean, that's pretty tough to say.
I think there's some projection going on there too. So like for the guys that are, oh, well, you just got hired because you're a female. They're probably a little bit jealous. I mean, you're pretty awesome. I kind of want to be you when I grow up. I can imagine that guys would be a little intimidated by you and your skills. And so for them, it's almost easier to somehow justify where you're at, and not just because you're like this totally badass female pilot, but because you're a female. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So
and to go back to your point about being a female worked against me far more than has worked for me.
Right.
In coming up, and so it gets to that point where when you are successful then and do manage to get the job you wanted or whatever license you wanted, well, you were handed it because you're female. It's like there's a switch. It's like you're held down,
Whether
down,
you
held
earned
down.
it or not.
Correct. Now you have it because you didn't earn it. Yeah.
Right.
That's more of a.
It says more about them, I think, than it does us.
Oh,
But
Right.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
Okay, so let me go a different direction with the issues. Taking the group as a whole, men and women, we know that there are differences. So are men built better for aviation, flying, cockpit than women? Or, I know that in a group you're going to have, guys that are down here on that level and women that are up here, certainly. But as a group, as a whole, are men built better for that, from decision making or, that lack of fear or whatever?
I would say on record that I think women are actually built better.
Okay.
They don't manhandle the
Well,
airplane.
you know what it is? That's a good point. But I would argue that women are actually built better because we have that higher developed prefrontal cortex. We stop, we think, we kind of analyze the situation, and I think we're better multitaskers. I'm just going on record and I'm saying that.
Insurance would actually agree with that. Insurance, I've talked to a couple of insurance guys that say they don't pay out on bad decision flying that caused an accident like they do on the men.
Oh, that's
Jeremiah.
interesting. Huh.
I think we're talking about the cognition, how the brain works, because a lot of that is kind of the brain power. And, so it's really going to depend on the situation, I think. I think you're going to come to the table with different assets, so different situations are going to pull different parts. So you think about from a male perspective, if you're not willing to ask for help and kind of pull that emergency cord and, say, hey, I've got an emergency, right up front, that's going to be a problem. So I think it really, a lot of it depends kind of on the situation, what's kind of presenting to you right then.
Okay, well, I think that's been very educational on what's going on. Last thoughts, anybody, about the men versus women in the cockpit?
Oh, it's a hot topic, that's for sure.
And I don't know that it ever won't be. That's
No.
the thing. It's always like, my club's better than your club kind of mentality. My religion's better than yours. My, political view is better than yours. Men are better than women, or, what's so sad about it is that we can't just say, hey, you know what? Like men and women, like we're all in this together. It's got to be one's better than the other. I see that a lot.
Right.
We're always trying to one up each other.
Yeah, for men, it's always winning the game, so.
Yeah. And so then women come in and we've got to try to,
Right.
we have to prove ourselves and then go a step further. And then it's just, this perpetual cycle.
Well, it's because we had to win when we fought the bear.
Yeah, exactly. If you didn't
guys
win,
get
you
eaten.
died.
Yeah, it was win or die. So.
The thing though, I will go on record and say is that at least here in our North Texas Aviators group, I found a really, really positive, group of people, both men and women, that are so great in inspiring others. Everybody. It's not just women in aviation. It's not just about guys in aviation. It's about people in aviation, and I really think that's what it's about.
Well, that's a great way to close it.
Yeah.
So, Jeremiah, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think whatever you come to the table with, whatever the challenges are, it's whether you see it as something that's going to hold you back or something that you're going to see as a challenge and let that kind of propel you and push you forward.
So, well, thank you guys for being part of this discussion. And thank you guys for watching and being a part of our aviation community. I hope you enjoyed it, and please, if you liked it, share it and subscribe.
Let's make aviation great again.